Welcome in Rose City to Soccer Made in Portland. I'm Ryan Clarke, joined by Chris Rifer. Been a long layoff for this podcast with not a whole lot happening in between, but plenty to talk about either way on this podcast today. On the Timbers and Thorns, obviously, both are in the midst of their off seasons with a handful of storylines that have popped up over the last month.
Off.
Yes, off.
This is like the offest off season so far. There's some serious offing going on.
Yeah, so beginning obviously with the Timbers. Last time we were on this podcast, we were discussing the recent hire of Phil Neville as the new head coach of the Timbers. Obviously, that came with its share of controversy and criticism from people in the soccer community and in the public and outside of it. And since then, the news has been relatively, if not extremely sparse in terms of
Neville's
off-season.
been off doing like Premier League, studio work. Other than that, just everybody's offing.
Yeah, and I can confirm that that Neville did meet with the Timbers Army as he promised after their criticism of what he did. So that was a positive step forward, I think, and was something that, is important for him to do, is connect with this community as he takes on this leadership role within the Timbers organization. Since then, no major moves in terms of the Timbers. Obviously, they let a handful of players go with the roster updates, some of whom were expected. Some, it's unfortunate that they didn't maybe get a second look at a young age. I think of names like Noel Caliscan, sort of moving on, maybe not up to the level of the type of players that they're looking for in the future, but you invest some time in a player, it's always unfortunate for fans to see them go. And Sebastian Blanco is the big headliner, obviously, leaving the Timbers after 6.5 years. Somebody who leaves a really strong legacy with the club, and someone who is beloved by fans, and many of whom did not want to see him go in this fashion. They wanted sort of the swan song that Blanco believed he deserved, that fans believed he deserved, and it didn't happen, and that's sometimes the business. But at the same time, it is interesting, and I think noteworthy that it ended this way, and that the two sides couldn't come to some sort of agreement on a lower salary to bring him back for one more year.
So this is actually one in which I will sort of come to the defense of the Timbers front office. Me noted Timbers front office stan and club shill will actually come to their defense on this point. I think this is a hard situation for everybody involved, and MLS in particular makes this very hard. This is a situation that we've seen sort of play out across the league. The Sounders just did with Nico Lodero, parting ways with him before Nico was ready to be done playing because of similar circumstances. Dax McCarty, there are a number that you can point to across the league of this happening, but it's just a challenging situation for both player and club, right? I mean, the reasonable expectations for what Seba was going to be able to contribute in 2024 are pretty low. I mean, he played hundreds, and not that many hundreds, of minutes in 2023. He was not bad, but I mean, far, 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 far from where he was when he was at his peak in terms of contribution in those minutes. And I think you could only project sort of a further slide down the hill in 2024, because that's just how time works. And so from the Timbers perspective, in a cap league where they have limited resources to use, I mean, is there any way you could justify paying him more than $200,000 or $300,000 next year, just based purely on his output? And that's even accounting for sort of the clubhouse benefits of having a guy like him. I don't think I could. Especially given the other demands that the Timbers have on their salary cap structure for next year. And at the same time, if you put yourself in Seba's shoes, this is a guy who has sacrificed a lot to be able to play even what he has been able to play the last couple of years. He's a guy who last year was making about $1.5 million in salary. We know he was a max TAM kind of guy, and that's where that range falls, a little bit higher than that even. He's a guy who, at the peak of his contract with the Timbers, was making, I think, a little bit over $2 million. And how would it feel for him to get offered a $250,000 or $300,000 contract for next year? If I was Seba, I would feel like that's a slap in the face, especially given everything he's contributed to the club over his time here, which is really significant. And given the amount he has sacrificed to be able to contribute even as much as he has over the course of the last couple of years, that feels like a slap in the face. And frankly, if I was him and I was looking at all those sacrifices, looking at all the time that I had to put into getting my body ready to play, looking at all of just literally the physical pain that I have to go through to play, and somebody said, hey, we'll offer you a couple $100,000 to do it again next year, I probably would think really hard about whether that was even worth it. You know, he's made good money over the course of his career. That's not a lot. And so I think it would be very fair. And I totally understand why he would say, I'm not interested in doing that. It would be nice if in MLS's structure, there was more of a greater ability for teams to be able to, you know, sort of have contracts where they could carry players out of respect for and the desire to keep them in the club in the later stages of their career. I mean, my perspective on MLS salary cap rules, which is apparently different than the MLS Board of Governors, is that they should be pretty dramatically opening up their rules. But in the current state, there's just no way to do that. Especially when you're in the Timbers situation where you need to be leveraging every single dime you possibly can of your salary cap resources to try to improve a roster that's failed the last 2 years.
Right. And I think that there is a duality in this situation that you touched on, right? It's the idea that, you know, I think that the Timbers and Ned Grabavoy deserve credit for doing the hard and necessary thing to try and do what they've talked about doing, which is sort of retooling this team in a way that will allow them to compete again and to get into the postseason and do more than just get into the postseason is what Ned Grabavoy talked about, what Phil Neville talked about, and what they have aspired to and spoken about building. Now, whether or not they fulfill that is up to them, right? It's this offseason, it's the following transfer windows. It's a process that isn't going to happen overnight by any means, but this is very much one of those periods in which you have to make some serious moves to do that. I think that a signal that maybe one of those type of moves could be on the semi-near horizon is the idea that they traded away their MLS Super Draft first round pick for 125 G's. It's
120 and 50 of it is in 2025.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, that's we're not interested in drafting. We'll take what we can get.
Yeah, money is money, and so maybe that's a signal, but that's the only thing we have to work on right now. Right?
Those are thin straws to be grasping at in terms of what they're doing. I mean, the headline for the Timbers is that there is no headline. Look, I think the precedent for this offseason in Timbers MLS history is the offseason between 2012 and 2013. That was the last time the Timbers failed to make the playoffs 2 years in a row. That was the last time that I think there really was sort of a really major roster reset that needed to be done. I think Ned Grabavoy would say, well, this isn't that significant. But at the bottom line is this was a bad team 2 years in a row. And so to the extent that they're minimizing the extent of the roster changes that need to happen, that's cause for concern in its own right. But that to me is the precedent that I look to in terms of the work that the Timbers need to get done over the course of this offseason. And here's the thing. As of this date, December 20th, 2012, the Timbers had signed Will Johnson. They'd signed Ryan Johnson. They traded for Ryan Johnson. They had traded for Michael Harrington. They had already been connected to and moved on from Mix Diskerud, and they were literally days away from being connected to Diego Valeri. By this point, that was a rebuild that happened with direction. That was a rebuild that happened with forethought. That was a rebuild where they had a plan and they went out and they executed that plan diligently. What have the Timbers done so far in this 2023 offseason? And the answer is bupkis. The answer is bupkis. They've done bupkis. They're more or less at the midterm of this offseason. They have an F because they've done nothing. They have not made any meaningful addition to the roster. Any. And I mean, to put a fine point on this, if this offseason fails like the last one did, Ned Grabavoy is not going to have a job this time next year. Right? I mean, that'll be 3 years in a row out of the playoffs. That'll be multiple off seasons in which they've needed to do something and they've failed. I mean, that's just the reality. Phil Neville might not have a job this time next year if this offseason fails. And I think when you look at the way the Timbers have in the past acted in these situations, when you look at other teams in MLS who are in similar situations, they're all making moves. Like even the Colorado Rapids are making moves. The Colorado Rapids are making moves. and we've seen nothing from the Timbers. And that's not to say that they can't, to go back to the class analogy, that's not to say that they can't in the second half of the semester, rebound, that they can't maybe pull a great final out of their tuchus and make some great signings in January and have the team in a good spot. But I mean, in light of the history, in light of the Timbers' struggles early in the season and the problems that they've had with trying to build the plane in flight the last several years, but especially the last couple of years, that F at the midterm is really worrying. And I think you don't see other signs that there is a plan in place. I mean, it's concerning to me that in the preseason press, in the immediate sort of postseason press conference, they were more definitive about the likelihood of moving on from Jimmy Chara than they are now. Whereas before he was sort of expected to leave. The most recent reporting that we've seen is he will leave if the right move presents itself. Well, let's be honest. Given what we've seen from Jimmy Chara and his occupancy of a DP spot and their inability to sign a senior DP unless they move on from him, the right move is whatever move is necessary to get him off of the Timber salary cap and to open that DP spot. It's amnestying him if necessary. And so the fact that there's uncertainty about that at this point is very much suggestive of the fact that they don't have a plan, that they're trying to figure it out now, which blows my mind. Blows my mind. Because the fact that they were going to have to make significant changes this offseason is not like new. That's not something that popped up at the end of the season. That was clear throughout basically the entirety of the season. That
it was clear when they fired Gio. Yeah,
it was clear when they fired Gio Savarese. It was clear before that when they were struggling and muddling through at the bottom of the table. This is a process that should have been months in the making. And that's why that 2012-2013 rebuild was able to happen so quickly, because it was months in the making. And we see no signs of that right now. Maybe they're holding it all for something, but there are no signs of it right now. And I think it's cause for serious concern.
And the Coachella Valley Invitational is the first sort of marker, right, of the preseason. February 4th through the 17th, down there in Indio. Was there last year. There hadn't really been major moves made beyond Evander at that point. And then after Coachella was when they traded Bill Tuiloma, and that was pretty much it for last offseason. That sort of offseason doesn't meet the sort of standards that they have laid out, right? They in their view, right, in the view that they have laid out to the public, that would be that type of offseason. I mean, bringing in a major player like Evander, like another Evander type of player, would be a big deal. But that type of offseason, even in itself, by the standards which Ned Grabavoy and others have laid out, is not enough to bring them up to the level that they aspire to be at. Now, as I said before, these type of things don't happen in one off season or one transfer window.
But
you
they
do have to, but they can, and you do have to, I think, lay the sort of foundation on which you aim to build the other pieces. Now, we don't know what is going on behind the scenes right now with Ned Grabavoy and company. Ned, Merritt Paulson, and the others who are involved in the different decisions that are being made behind the scenes right now for the club. They haven't had a press conference since Neville was hired, and communication on that front with insiders, with people like me, with newsbreakers, has been pretty minimal in terms of the discussion beyond.
I mean, poor Tom Bogert has broken the same news like 3 times about the Timbers.
At this point, that's been the same story a couple times in a row. The roster updates, I do think, are worth touching on, like the folks who have left, even though obviously we're talking about additions right now. We're talking about the changes and the things that folks believe are necessary to improve the team. They picked up the option on Nathan Fagasa, which I think is a wise move. He's a guy that has shown serious potential, but hasn't quite made it up to the level of being a consistent MLS contributor. Did very well on his loan in San Antonio, back there, playing for a team that he had a lot of success with before at the USL level. So that was good for him. They declined the options on Brian Acosta, Frank Boli, Noel Caliscan, Diego Gutierrez, Eric Miller, Yaroslav Niashgoda, and Justin Rasmussen. The only ones who they are in negotiation with out of a group of departees are Acosta, Miller, and then David Bingham, who's out of contract. That's a lot of subtraction of guys that either were contributors or were the sort of player that you expected to maybe take another step and get into that opportunity zone as a player. Diego Gutierrez is one that's particularly surprising to me because Gio and others around the organization were talking about him maybe being a starter at the start of last season, and that taking a tailspin, knowing what I know about Diego and his work ethic, and knowing what I know about the Timbers' willingness to sort of keep those young guys around in the past and try to kick the tires. That's surprising. Caliscan is surprising, just given that he really only had 1 year to sort of adjust to everything. Boley, not all that surprising. I think that he was somebody that was at a bit of a high salary number compared to his production.
The writing was pretty well on the wall when Felipe Mora really sort of seized that position by the end of the year.
Especially with the possibility of bringing in a young DP as either a number 9 or a winger that can play at the number 9 spot. That's all theoretical right now, but
extremely theoretical.
But the subtractions, I mean, looking at all of those, what is sort of your 1,000-foot view?
I don't see a whole lot of surprise in there. I mean, those sorts of young players, there is just naturally a decent amount of roster churn and turnover. I think Gutierrez and Caliscan had some solid performances over the course of the year, but did they do anything that made me think they are very likely to be part of, the rotation next year? No, I wouldn't say that for either. And so I'm not shocked that I think there's just kind of a decent amount of churn, and maybe hopefully for both of those guys, they'll turn up somewhere and hopefully be able to make a career at another spot. But that's kind of just how it goes. Not surprised at all with Boley. Given the role that he played, I think he was okay. I think he was an okay signing. He contributed for them in certain times, but he was pretty clearly by the end of the year their second best number 9. And in an offseason in which they're looking to improve that position, if you're the second best number 9 at that position, you're probably not coming back, especially if you cost a decent amount of money. So I think that's sort of just the slam dunk there. And, I think it's not surprising to me that Brian Acosta, they declined his option. His option almost certainly would have had him be in the TAM range again, as he was last year. His sort of role in the team and play doesn't justify that. That said, if there is an ability to bring him back, as sort of a depth piece in that central midfield mix, I think that makes a lot of sense. And so that's a guy who I think is worth keeping an eye on. to see if they're able to agree to terms, but it's going to be at a lower salary number than he was at before. He came in at Colorado as a DP. I mean, kind of a Colorado Rapids DP, which is to say, compared to the rest of the league, a fake DP. But he was on a pretty high salary number that I think the Timbers couldn't justify carrying into 2024. And Bingham and Miller hopefully are going to be, if they can bring them back, solid depth. Those are two good, solid depth pieces. So you need players like that on your roster. So I think the goal would be to bring them back on salaries that make sense for that. But if you're going into the season sort of penciling those guys into your starting 11, I mean, I think those are the kinds of moves that the Timbers need to be making. That if they're not able to make, and they're thinking they're starting the season with those guys as starters, even part-time starters, while they're still figuring things out, I think that those are exactly the kinds of instances in which you would be calling this a failed offseason, and then say that they have failed to get the business done that they said they wanted to get done and needed to get done in order to have the team in place together and ready to go when things kick off for real in late February.
Let's shift gears to the Thorns, who are in the midst of their own off season right now, and one that is a seismic one, I think, for the team and how things have shifted. Obviously the ownership change is the big thing hanging over everything and could in many ways be stymieing some of the other aspects. We don't know that for sure, but it's a big thing that's hanging over all of this, right? Is the shift over to what is now expected to be the Bethal family, investors in the NBA Sacramento Kings. Plenty of money to throw around there with their investments, and we'll talk a little more about that in the second half of this discussion. But the start of it, I'd like to talk about the moves that have been made for the Thorns. So Emily Menges and Hannah Betfort traded to Bay FC and to the Utah Royals, respectively, for salary money, or excuse me, for what
allocation money
and all the different types of monies. So they were
only one type of allocation money to my knowledge in NWSL, but hey, as MLS has showed, all sorts of types of allocation money you can create going forward.
Right. And they're, I think, going to get rid of that or something is the plan for NWSL, but who knows what, especially with the salary cap now.
I hope you saw the Twitter exchange this week where, because it was reported out that NWSL was moving toward, a more open, higher salary cap, but fewer mechanisms sort of structure. And the MLS Players Association retweeted that was sort of like the thinking phase, like, interesting. So good job, NWSL. In many ways, much more forward thinking than MLS is.
Right. And so those trades were made in order primarily to receive protection in the expansion draft. Which is interesting because those are two players in Menges and Betfort who folks talked about as possibilities of being picked in that expansion draft, but it protects other players whom the Thorns believed were at risk of being picked and who they may want to bring back and have in more prominent roles than maybe Menges, who is toward the tail end of her career, and Betfort, who I think had some strong stretches last season, but hasn't quite risen to the level of being a steady contributor for the Thorns. Obviously both beloved by fans, both with different sort of different personalities and different storylines sort of swirling around them. Obviously, the Menges move has a unique storyline in that the Reen Wilkinson saga that happened last year is an unavoidable thing to talk about. That likely had little to nothing to do with this move at all. She was somebody who maintained a strong relationship with a lot of the folks in that locker room, and is somebody that is loved in the Portland community. Menges did a great job connecting with people through her newspaper too. The Bel Esprit project, I think, was awesome. I got a chance to read that on a relatively regular basis. So shout out to Menges for doing the journalisms. And then Betfort, somebody that was also a strong locker room presence and really was just a hilarious personality to be around at Thorns training. Very unique and passionate individual. So both of those players, I think, will get good opportunities elsewhere. But it's another story as with the Timbers, where there has been subtraction but not addition, right? There's been this subtraction in order to avoid the expansion draft, but we look around the NWSL, we see Gotham basically
Arming up.
throwing buckets of money at high level talent right now to build out a roster that already won the championship this year. And other teams in NWSL investing a lot of money in their players, Houston being one of them. It's a lot is happening around the league, and this is pretty early in the offseason, but it's
players are coming off the board.
Players are coming off the board, and frankly, the Thorns have to be careful, even with the external sort of factor of the sale happening and maybe it limiting their abilities. They have to be careful not to be passed up by the rest of the league, because the standard has been set for years by the Thorns as the epitome of what it means to contend and build outstanding rosters and bring in high quality individuals to this team, right? The 3 championships did not happen by accident. These teams were built systemically and very meticulously over the years to contend and to be the most talented rosters in the league. And right now they are behind the 8 ball when it compares to some of the other teams in the league, and they have to sort of find that way to maintain the foundation and the culture that they've built and sell that to high level players, because they can't sort of just take away from what they had last year and then semi retool and hope to contend next year. I think that there's just too much talent in the NWSL, particularly with 2 new teams being added into the mix. And as we know, expansion teams are no slouches. San Diego Wave proved that in contending the way they did their first year. So that this is big. This is, as we've talked about before, this has the potential to be a make or break for the Thorns.
Yeah, absolutely. I do want to back up for a moment and to give some shouts to Emily Menges, who over her long career in Portland, I think was at times even fairly considered part of the cornerstone of the club, including in some very successful years. One of the most consistent, until injuries sort of caught up, one of the most consistent defenders in the league, frankly, an in-pin starter in the back line for a long, long time. That speaks, I think, not only to her quality as a soccer player, but also to her professionalism and her work ethic. And she was just very simply put, tremendous Thorn over the course of her time in Portland. And so the best of wishes to her going forward. Everything I have ever heard about the unfortunate situation with Rian Wilkinson, there was never any element of Emily Menges did anything wrong. And I think that's important to keep in mind. I agree with you. It is kind of like unavoidable context for something like this, but there's a difference between what is an unfortunate situation or an uncomfortable situation and a situation in which somebody did something wrong. And I have never seen anything to indicate that Emily Menges did anything wrong in that instance.
Yeah, it's been something that has been maintained by everybody surrounding that situation and doesn't merit additional real conversation, because frankly we're talking about people and their lives and
that's right.
about love. Okay, so this is something that goes beyond the little miniature dramas of playing on a soccer team.
Yeah, and so I think when Thorns fans think about Emily Menges, I think they will and they should think about her quality and her contributions to the club. That is her legacy here. And they were very, very good, and they're deserving of a tremendous amount of respect for what she did for the team over the course of her long tenure in Portland. And so, best wishes to her as she is pursuing her next ventures. I hope, frankly, that she's able to sort of get back on the field with regularity and sort of put that in that the injuries that have sort of limited her and brought her in and out over the last couple of years behind her, and kind of have a little bit of a renaissance. I think that's a possibility. But it will now not be in Portland, which comes with an element of sadness, but probably opportunity, I think, as well for her. I did want to sort of pause on that note because I think it's worth discussing and acknowledging her significant contributions over the course of her time here. With respect to the Thorns, I mean, the headline is kind of similar with the Timbers. One thing that we should also note that is meaningfully different from the Timbers and is, I think, a meaningful point going forward is that the Thorns reached a contract extension with Hina Sugita. That's good. I mean, Sugita is an important part of the team. She can be an important part of a good team going forward. It is important to lock players like Hina down. My hope for her in coming years is that the Thorns find a role for her and stick to it. I think she has been limited to a significant extent by using her as kind of a utility player, playing on the wing, playing in a two-way role in central midfield, playing in a more attacking role in central midfield. I think finding Sugita a role will benefit her significantly in terms of her contribution. It's just hard to be really impactful and consistently impactful and tactically disciplined as a utility player. And I get why there is an impulse to play somebody like Sugita as a utility player. Just her sort of set of skills means that you can put her in a number of spots, but just because you can doesn't mean you should. And I think some clarity of role going forward would really benefit Sugita, and I think it would really benefit the Thorns as they move forward. But if you want to talk about an important player to lock down in light of the departure of Crystal Dunn, Hina Sugita became pretty critical. And so it's good news that they were able to reach that contract extension. The bad news is that they've done bupkis else. And that's a real problem. I mean, we're seeing big free agents either get on the 1 yard line or over the line in terms of signing contracts with other clubs.
Pretty much all of them with Gotham.
A lot of them with Gotham.
Yeah.
I mean, just today, Savannah McCaskill going to the San Diego Wave, the rich get richer there too. I mean, that is another team with whom the Thorns are very competitive, or were very competitive, at the top of the table that's getting better. The Thorns aren't. And I think that's really worrying. I think you can't ignore the context of the sale, the looming sale. I think it is totally fair to ask about whether there is direction in light of that, or if they are sort of just caught in stasis while everybody moves forward. And I think it's perfectly reasonable to worry about how that will affect the Thorns' effectiveness going forward. I think it's even more reasonable to be borderline panicking about what that means for the Thorns' ability to reach a contract extension with Sophia Smith. And I think these are all things that as every day goes by, Thorns fans are fairly getting more anxious about all of these questions. Because here's the reality, and I think this is probably a reality that if the Bethal family isn't thinking about now, they will be soon. But if they're not able to retain Sophia Smith, if they're not able to sign some free agents, the product on the field is going to get worse quickly. Like next year, they're not going to be as competitive. They're going to be, I think you would probably project them as a borderline playoff team, and with some downside there too. And there is going to be a transition to the new ownership. That transition will be harder if the team is not producing on the field.
And
everything about it will be
that
harder
transition
if the team's
is likely to happen well into the season too, because this sale is not yet concluded. All signs point to the Bethals being the ones to make this purchase. It's I can say confidently that is what is going to happen, right? Is the sale is going to happen to the Bethals, and
that said, we've got some recent precedent in Portland for, you're not in the end zone until you're in the end zone.
Right. And so that transition, as was reported thoroughly by Meg Linehan, who did a tremendous job in her story recently about this, that transition is going to inevitably stretch into the regular season schedule, because the NWSL season essentially starts in late March. And so if you're closing this sale in, let's say, February, which is by all indications a potential possibility, right?
Could be sooner, but yeah, that's reasonable.
Could be sooner, but let's say it's February. That gives you 1 month between that and the start of the season to make that transition. Not enough time. And to Peregrine's credit, to the credit of the people who are making this sale, they have committed according to Meg's reporting, to assisting with that transition and keeping staff on that are employed by them to allow that to happen more smoothly and not just sort of cleave off from the Thorns and then say, here you go, Bethal family, go build an entire front office and soccer structure out of thin air. That I think is important. And I think that the idea that Karina LeBlanc will stay on as GM is interesting. At least that's according to what the reporting looks like, right? Is that she will, at least in the interim, at least in the time between now and when the transition ends, she will remain the GM. What she does with that time is obviously important and something that fans are continuing to keep an eye on as the rest of NWSL loads up.
And the reality is that the challenge of the Bethel family, not even sort of setting aside the sort of personnel transitions that are going to take some months, even setting that aside, I mean, the job that they're going to have going forward, they have a number of things they need to address, right? They need to figure out Sophia Smith's long-term future. They need to figure out a training facility. But maybe as big as those two, and a longer term project is they need to rebuild connections with the fan base. They need to rebuild connections with partners, with sponsors, and those are all really critical things for the long term health and not viability, but sort of success of the club. And all of that is easier if you have success on the field. And so if they're trying to do all of that while the team on the field is taking a significant step back, which looks like very much a possibility, maybe even a probability at this point, that becomes harder. And so, yeah, I mean, those are all the things that are rattling around in my head right now. But as every free agent comes off the board, every time there's another signing, and they're happening at a rate of multiple per day right now, that a major free agent either comes off the board or is reported to be close to a deal with usually Gotham. I think the anxiety level very reasonably increases. And then questions start to come up about whether it's desirable for Karina LeBlanc to stay in that role. I think like Ned Grabavoy is GMing for his job right now, I think Karina LeBlanc is GMing for her job right now. And we've seen similar out production from both to this point in the offseason, which is to say, bupkis. And if that bupkis continues much longer, I think they're both going to be in very, very perilous positions.
So the Bethal family, obviously nearing this purchase, fans are curious about who these people are, what their sort of background is, why they care about the Thorns, why they're investing. And going to likely become the owners here in Portland, taking over for Peregrine from Eric Paulson. They are people who have invested heavily in the Sacramento Kings. Their capital firm essentially invested almost I don't know if that's the right term, but invested almost
private
$1 billion.
Equity firm.
Private equity, sure. Yeah. They they invested $1 billion in the Kings Arena and the surrounding real estate. They have major investments in real estate around the country, particularly in opportunity zones, which is something that has been discussed in political circles, has been debated. The idea of investing in those areas and the ramifications in terms of gentrification is something that the Bethals have talked about, that they have, I'm sure, over the years received criticism for, but it's a big portion of sort of how they have made their money on the investment front over the last several years. It originally began with Raj Bethal, the patriarch of the family, emigrating to the U.S. from India in 1960, starting a swimwear company alongside his wife Marta, and in 2006, their two children bought out the company and started this Raj Capital Managing Partners, right? And so this investment firm, this venture capital sort of situation has led to primarily real estate investment for the Bethals, and then now sports is a huge sector for them. The Kings is the biggest example that we have of investment in sports, and they have invested a lot of money. And it may not be personal wealth as much as it is through the firm, but either way, to have access to that level of funds is something that I think is decidedly different than what has been the case in Portland over the last several years. Much of Merritt Paulson and Hank Paulson's net worth, Hank's net worth is different than Merritt's net worth. Let's just say that. So Hank's net worth is what makes him the majority owner in Peregrine Sports, right? Merritt's net worth is primarily the rising valuation of the two teams that he currently owns, primarily the Timbers, who are worth significantly more than the Thorns are. That level of investment, when you talk to people around the club who have been players, who have worked on the business side, that level of investment simply just has not been able to be there in ways that it maybe should have over the years, right? That's
they haven't built a training facility.
They haven't built
the most obvious, like
the biggest one is the training facility.
That's been a need that's been known for a long time, and they haven't done it.
Yeah, and so they have laid out.
There's only one reason.
Yeah, they have laid out the groundwork at this point, and from their perspective, the groundwork for the Bethals to sort of push that over the line. They say that they have multiple sites sort of lined up. We haven't really had an update recently about that, but I assume that once the sale goes through, there will be more significant talk, more likely from the Bethals, about what that looks like specifically, right? But that level of money moving around is the type of thing that the NWSL has come out and said they want for ownership stakes in teams, right? You look at the people that own Bay FC, lot of venture capital stuff going on there, billions of dollars moving around or being part of personal wealth is what this league is at right now. So that's more of an insight into who the Bethals are, what their sort of financial output is capable of being, and it's high. And so the majority owner, or rather the person who will sort of be in the operating sense, like the front facing individual who you would say that is the sort of owner of the Thorns, right, is going to be Lisa Bethal Mirage, who is the between the two siblings, she's the sister, and then her brother is going to sort of be a co-owner with her, but in less of a front facing role. So that is interesting and compelling in that it is somebody who is a female voice at the forefront of these board of governors meetings, and somebody who has this experience in sports, and people will get to know more over the next few years and see not only what she and her brother have to offer, but what their passion is, what their sort of personal and emotional investment is in this club, and how it grows into the future. There's a lot of things to look at and think about as these new owners take over.
Yeah, and the financial prowess is important. That's an important element, and they're going to bring a considerable amount of that, especially by NWSL standards, to the Thorns. There will be the money available in there if they choose to use it to build the Thorns club into one that is very, very competitive at the top of NWSL. And I think every indication seems to be that would be in their interest to be that. I don't think there's any basis to buy the Thorns to operate sort of on a modest level because of the opportunities that are available here in Portland. And so, I think the reality is likely to be that there are those incentives to make those investments, and that's important. But that's only part of the equation. The other part of the equation is going to be how they manage the club. And we don't know, and we're going to have to wait and see. Certainly hope for the best. And I think there are reasons for optimism, but we're going to have to wait and see. And so hopefully, they are getting boots on the ground, so to speak, relatively soon to start the process of building out that team that's going to actually run the club and set that direction. because there are a lot of decisions and there's a lot of progress that needs to be made very, very quickly, that they're not going to have a ton of runway to make. So we'll see.
What is your perspective on the sort of power structures that remain in place as this transition happens? Because a lot of fans have expressed concern to me on this front, and it's something that I think definitely merits discussion, is the idea that, yes, this team will absolutely be a separate business entity once the Bethals fully take over, have sort of set up their front office the way they want it, and the soccer ops and everything else. But a power structure obviously will remain in place in that the lessees of Providence Park remains Peregrine Sports, and the Merritt has come out and said publicly that he is committed to giving a good deal to the Thorns in terms of utilizing Providence Park to play their games. The Thorns players still want to play there. They want there to be a grass field, but they still want to play in that venue. And their fans are putting butts in seats and filling that place up in a way that is extremely unique and special. And they deserve no less than that in terms of the size of a stadium, even if they were to somehow get their own in the future. What do you think, though, of that power structure that remains, where Merritt Paulson does not own the Portland Thorns, but he and his entity in Peregrine Sports sort of
still their landlord, right?
Are still the landlord. Yeah.
I think we're just going to have to wait and see how it plays out. Obviously there is going to be some transitional time in which there is figuring out how the business structures between the two clubs are going to work. Obviously there's going to be some time in figuring out how that landlord subtenant relationship is going to work. And all of those things. I think it could very well be something that is largely a non-story. If it's done right and done well, it could very well be something that doesn't, have big implications on the direction of the Thorns in the future, and that the Thorns get to continue to play in Providence Park, which is really the only viable place for them to play in the Portland area, and that remains a good place for them. But I think you could also foresee futures in which that's more problematic. And it's more of a challenge for the Bethal family and for the Thorns as a club. So I don't think there's a good, I understand people's questions about it and people's even concerns about it. I just don't think there's a good way to look into a crystal ball to see how that's going to play out, because it's going to depend on a lot of things that frankly we don't have a ton of visibility into.
And we will know more on the nature of the sale, on the price, which has been discussed a bit in the past by folks close to the situation. Back when Merritt announced the sale, there had been talks from folks in the know about something upwards of $65 million, which would be significant for sure, but how that compares to the rest
also
of NWSL.
A steal at twice the price.
Yeah,
given what I think is going to happen in women's soccer. So
there's
a huge bargain.
Yeah, that would be a major bargain, I think, given the direction that NWSL is going. And I'm sure that people with investment expertise in particular the sports realm and the Bethals can see that, right? Like that's absolutely the future.
Here's the thing: invest in women's sports, print money. That's it. Invest. And it's going to and print money. That's how it's going to go for these investors who are getting in at this time and who are ambitious and growth oriented in running these teams and in running these leagues. So invest in women's sports, print money.
Yeah, it's really remarkable, I think, what we've seen over the last couple of years with NWSL in particular, and something that I'd like to see with other sports leagues like the WNBA and others, where it shouldn't be a scenario where Caitlin Clark is taking a pay cut coming out of Iowa from her NIL money to play in WNBA, right? Like there are a lot of limiting factors that exist there. And
that's all part of investing.
Yeah.
Is setting up the structures in order to reward excellent players who create value. That's all part of investing. And if you're truly being ambitious in the way that you're investing, I think we've seen enough to have a high degree of confidence that is going to be a very, very profitable venture for those who are smart about it and for those who do it right. don't be the New York Mets. But we've seen enough to know that, and we've seen these values now increase enough in the last few years to know that if you're a competent and ambitious investor, it is looking like a very, very, very good investment. So come do that. Come invest and be ambitious about it, because that's going to work out well.
And I think there are a lot of good examples within our own country of maybe what not to do. The approach...
Country?
The world, yes.
Well, I mean,
obviously.
I was thinking smaller.
Okay. In the country, in the United States of America, there's a men's...
State, county, city, block.
There's a men's soccer league that is facing a great deal of criticism, and I maybe want to have this be the little touchstone we end on here. That is facing a lot of criticism for its attempt now to try and make the MLS Next Pro teams participate in the US Open Cup, and how that runs counter to maybe the purported care for growth of soccer in this country. It's faced a lot of really strong and I think accurate criticism for how it's handled this. And now this morning, right before we recorded this podcast, US Soccer was basically like, nope. So that's going to be a fight on its hands, which we figured might be the case, but is interesting in and of itself. I think that is a good example for maybe the NWSL, which I'm sure sees itself as a strong partner with MLS in a lot of different ways. But that's an example, perhaps, in the perspective of some, of what not to do.
2 Grinches so far for me this holiday season. The first is whoever the genius was who decided to design wrapping paper with glitter on it. Like, honestly, might be a serial killer. Just like, glitter is something to be avoided. It's just it's a bad substance. Like it's something to be avoided.
I'm with you. I'm anti-glitter.
But like usually that's fairly easy, right? Like just say no. If somebody's like, "Hey, do you want this glitter?" The answer is no, I don't. And you can walk away and not deal with it. But like if you get a gift that's wrapped in wrapping paper that has glitter on it, this may have happened to me. There's nothing you can do. Like, right? You're socially bound. You can't reject that very thoughtful gift, because you don't want to open the glitter wrapping paper for fear of turning into like the kid from Charlie Brown that's always like got the cloud of dirt around him, but like that with glitter. Because that's what's going to happen if you open the gift, but you can't like turn it back. So you're stuck. And so Grinch number 1 is whoever designed wrapping paper with like glitter stuff on it. Not good. Grinch number 2 is the people in MLS who decided to basically, in as many words, pull MLS and MLS players and MLS teams effectively out of the US Open Cup. Ridiculous. Short-sighted and selfish.
And that's a sentiment that I hear from a great deal of people, not just on the internet, which, as we know, can be a bubble, but in real life. When you talk to people who care about soccer in this community and in other communities around the country, they are frankly disgusted by this move. They see it as cynical. They see it as greedy. And you know, I as a journalist cover these things with a tremendous and relentless amount of objectivity. But I'm inclined to agree with these people when I hear those things, because it's so like brazenly ridiculous. These type of decisions, and then sort of framing them as like trying to give young players opportunities to develop. Look, MLS Next Pro is
don't tinkle on my leg and tell me it's raining.
Yeah, it's a great idea in theory, like the idea of building out these academy systems in this way and having them compete at a high level. But come on, man. Like, the evidence is not there that is even the case yet. And how would the US Open Cup further contribute to that in almost any way? I mean, what's happening here is to me an idea of trying to sort of control the narrative and marketing about soccer in the United States, right? It's the idea that I mean, the Messi documentary is a good example on Apple TV, right? That if you watch that, you see a lot of really cool stuff, but not even a breath about the U.S. Open Cup and their run, which is noteworthy, I think, when you talk about what the sort of potential agendas are here.
It's a hit. I mean, like MLS is putting a hit out on U.S. Open Cup, right? And you understand why they want to open up the dates. They want to be able to schedule league games and leagues cup games and those sorts of things, and things that will make them more money in the dates that they otherwise have to schedule U.S. Open Cup games for. But it's also the tournament that has the most history in the United States. It's the tournament that does allow sort of inter-tier competition. It's the kind of tournament that is common and present in every single major country, sort of soccer playing country that I know of. And it very much looks like MLS is putting a hit out on it so that it can take more of the pie for itself. I don't know how to interpret it otherwise. And don't tell me that it's for player development. That's ridiculous. That is an explanation that fails on its face. And is the kind of thing that when you see somebody say it, you know that they're not saying it in good faith, because it just doesn't make sense.
You have a little news to share, sir. You join an exclusive club that on this podcast there was previously only one member.
That's true. Of engaged people.
Yes. Chris Rifer is engaged, ladies and gentlemen. My gosh. What a day.
Yes, very excited. Very excited. Didn't happen today, to be clear.
No, it did not happen today.
Many days ago. But yeah, thank you. We're very excited.
Congratulations, sir. We are happy for you and Jackie. It's going to be a heck of a wedding. All the Timbers players are going to be there.
Zero will be there. Not a single one.
No, there won't. Chara's not going to do the.
That you're confusing, my upcoming wedding with Sebastian Blanco's wedding, which looks like it was like the party of the century.
Dude,
congratulations to them, by the way. Very happy for them and their family to be able to take that step. The Instagram videos it just looks insane.
Yeah, that was an immaculate event. They had like a really famous like Latin pop star performing.
Yeah.
There was the flower setup up there was immaculate. The star-studded guests of Timbers lore and of other Argentine soccer lore, that was something else.
As best I can tell, the second biggest party in Argentina this year, second only to when Argentina won the World Cup. But seriously, congratulations to them. It's a party that they are worthy of, and celebrating them and their family. So
yeah, I just love stories like that allow us to see these athletes as more than just athletes, right? As these human beings that are making these wonderful memories with the people that they love. And Seba is to speak to Seba, he's a genuinely good guy and he gave a lot to this city. So to see him happy and partying his butt off like that at his wedding with the people he loves was really heartwarming. So that'll wrap it up for us here on Soccer Made in Portland. As we wrap up this year, I want to thank everyone who has listened to this podcast over the last couple of years. I want to thank Chris Rifer for his continued candid commentary on all of these issues. Somebody who I think is as clear-eyed and full-hearted of a co-host as one could find, and did a great job contextualizing a lot of the stuff that we've covered over the last couple of years. So thank you to everybody for listening, and will
thank you as well. Yeah. Thank you for not only the podcast every week or so in the off season, leaning on the but also for your journalism throughout the year. The coverage is important, both in terms of the everyday stuff about games and trades and all of that kind of stuff, but also in covering the club. Coverage is in the end good for the club, even when that they may not necessarily like it. It is good to have both accountability and also to have discussion. The worst thing that could possibly be said about the Portland Timbers or the Portland Thorns, there's nothing at all. And it's not only important that people are saying things, but that people are in good faith doing their due diligence and following the club. And when things are good, saying that things are good. And when things are less good, saying that things are less good. The truth is helpful, and we appreciate all of your efforts in bringing the truth to us.
Thank you, man. Appreciate you. Appreciate everybody. And we will catch you later.